Welcome to this episode of the Ohio Lodge of Research podcast, OLR Connections. In this conversation, we discuss the merits of Masonic education with Right Worshipful Brother James A Buckhorn from the Grand Lodge of Indiana, Right Worshipful Brother James Laramee of the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin, and Right Worshipful Brother Chad Kopenski of the Grand Lodge of Ohio. But at the risk of opening a can of worms that we may never close, just open conversation of what is Masonic education, but your thoughts as to the similarities, differences of education and research. Whomever wants to start.
Oh boy, here I go. So I've struggled with this. I don't know that I know the answer myself. And the thought I just had when you were talking is that perhaps there's a version of Masonic education that is capitalized and a version that is not. You know, big E education versus little e education. I had a very wonderful friend and mentor who told us once at Lodge that Masonic education in the Lodge is anything that a brother wants to talk about. And I appreciate the spirit of Masonic education with that, but I don't know that that's true. I took a class with Sean Iyer of the George Washington Memorial, Masonic Memorial. He has this wonderful class on the early texts of Freemasonry. And it started up during COVID. And one of the very first things you go over in the class is his version of the different classifications of certain things. So, he's got a guide, a rubric almost, and this is a level one. This falls into, the first part. This is the second part. This is the third. And I think that's almost required today, right? How many times have we seen a Grand Lodge or a lodge advertise Masonic education and you roll your eyes because, what does that mean? Not even because you think it's going to be silly, but because, great. That's like telling someone you work in IT. Let's narrow that down quite a bit very quickly with just 3 or 4 questions. I will say that I have, to quote myself and to quote what I've been pushing currently, I think research is the first step to education. I've given a few talks on this, and David, I think you've seen part of one of them where I kind of say, verification is the first step. If verification is the first step of research, then research is the first step of education, something like that, right? I think they go hand in hand. I don't think that lodge histories or biographies are, all that there is to research. And I don't think that talking about how to tie a tie for lodge is the only thing to education. I think they can be pretty broad. So to answer your question with a question, maybe we should think about defining what Masonic education is, or I guess the predominant categories that people, what am I trying to say? Kind of like Sean Iyer did, we break up this great broad term into different boxes, different categories, right? And so when we say, this kind of Masonic education, right? We break it out further, but not in such a regimented way that it doesn't become fun anymore and it becomes a laborious chore. Yeah, I'll stop now.
Hey, Jason, that was kind of in our first conversations, that was sort of your struggle in Wisconsin, wasn't it? That people had a very specific idea of what education was supposed to be.
Yeah, I recall us talking probably longer than this podcast will go about what education was and what it could be. But I really enjoy your definition of it, that you can, anything that you can tie back Masonically or teach a lesson Masonically is a really good definition of that. It's creating that understanding in a Masonic context.
And but you still struggle with that in Wisconsin now, right? I mean, people still think it's just one thing. Is that fairly true?
Yeah, but that comes down to the individual too. You have different kinds of Masons. You have more just charitable Masons and you have more educational Masons. And I don't think there's a better definition for either one of them. You're trying to give them both understanding of our Masonic tenets and whatever it is they're doing, whether it be charity or really diving deep into the history and the esotericism and stuff like that.
And I think one of the hard parts, and James and I have had this conversation too, is that you were saying that research has to be the first step, and I almost think that reflection has to be that first step of, saying why, or what, that idea of questioning. But in talking to the other jurisdictions, there did seem to be this sort of rigid definition of education, but the rigidity had more to do with what it wasn't versus what it was. And usually that was centered either around ritual or that was centered around particular duties. Like, Ohio, because we have district education officers are not allowed to talk anything about ritual. Although, how do you talk about Masonry without somehow bringing up our symbols, and ritual? Oftentimes, it was limited to things like leadership development, and there's a whole argument now about whether Masonry should be even teaching leadership, or its lodge histories or these sorts of things. And the hard part has been, I think, let me back up a second. And for a while, it seemed to me that a lot of lodge education or Masonic education was limited to history. And that seemed to be almost the purview of our lodges of research. I know, David, you and I talked about when I first joined the OLR, it seemed like all anybody was talking about was, history. But the OLR has kind of changed its definition, and Ohio has kind of changed its definition to go more along with what you were saying, James. I mean, that's the question I keep going back to, is that education is supposed to have a point, right? You're teaching somebody to do something. You're bringing somebody from point A to point Z, but every Mason has their own point Z. So how do we have one path or one definition? Like,
devil's advocate interjection.
Please do.
Yeah, and this is the question, right, that I kind of try to drive home. But my question is why? Who said that?
Who said
that, Chad? And that, right, because you're saying, they say that, or it's said that. Well, who's saying that? And that's not let's nitpick everything. But I think the question that's always on deck for the Masonic scholar or for the Mason who's interested in the way the world around them works is the W's. And it is that inquisitiveness and curiosity of who, what, when, where, why, right? Had a guy in my lodge tell me once how to carry the rod. And I said to him, thank you so much for telling me. Where can I read more about that? I want to look up the source document, right? And he got really upset, right? But there's so many things in Masonry that we understand to be true. Even me, right? Even all of us here, we understand it to be true. We don't necessarily know why we understand it to be true. And it's our duty to go figure that out, right? So if people are saying, well, it's really understood that this is the definition of Masonic education, but let's ask, time out, who's saying that? Not to question it, not to say it's wrong, but let's just to make sure we're on the same page. Oh, King Solomon wrote this down and it's well known, guys. It's, education is this, right? Oh, great. Now we're on the same page, right? Well, always asking why. But sorry to interject.
No, but you're to your point. But that is what happened in Ohio. I mean, we didn't have a clear definition per se. Historically, what had happened was that education was seen as where you go to fix things. If you look through the history, and I'm going to say the last 75 years, it's really about when education became something separate in terms of what Grand Lodge of Ohio did. It seemed like they were looking at what lodges were doing and realized that something was missing. Right? Why don't they know about as lodges are being inspected? Well, we need an educational program for that. Oh, education committee, and then we have the leadership program, or we have there aren't educational presentations in lodge, so we're going to write 10 a year that the lodges have to do, or we're not doing leadership training, or we're not doing candidate counseling. So the definition of education for a long time in Ohio was reactive, and it was about just solving the problems that was seen in the lodges. And there's been a switch, but there's tension there about making the education committee more proactive and to let it have an agenda and a view. That we as education committee, we think Masonic education falls along these lines. And our job is to enlighten and empower lodges and give them the resources they need to do things their way, this way, as opposed to something monolithic, which goes to kind of what you're saying. The larger question is, why? That there is no one definition. But it has to be supported and cultivated for lodges and Masons to find their own.
I've got a lot of thought on this since I'm in the middle of creating not just a Grand Lodge program, but an LMS platform for our Grand Lodge, for our members, for the members like me who fell through the gaps of education at my first lodge, didn't really have mentorship at all, right? What can I do now to take my negative experiences in Masonry and use them as a positive inversely? How can I flip it around and make sure that the next 100 guys don't experience the bad parts of what I did, but also make sure that they get to experience the great parts of what I did, right?
I think what you're talking about, and you and I have talked about this individually, is this, and I keep using the phrase enlighten and empower. There's been this sort of thing that's happened, at least in Ohio Masonry. We have an inspection schedule where lodges are inspected every year. And with every Grand Master who comes in has their particular program that reflects their priorities. And so very often you have lodges. I had this when I was district deputy. I'd walk in and they would just say, just tell me what you want me to do. Right. It wasn't that they had a passion for their lodge. They're just like, just tell me what I have to do so you will go away and stop, bugging me. Or I remember once I went in, was inspecting a lodge, talking about membership. And he said to me, the master said, don't you think if I knew how to fix this, I would do it? And I was like, oh, right. So we're doing a really good job of kicking you and telling you how much you suck. We're not doing a good job at all of telling you how to stop sucking.
Grand Lodges have, quietly crept in to fill the gap that lodges have left. And it's not been a malicious thing that's happened. It's, Grand Lodges filling in the gap where lodges aren't self-confident and don't have the power that they used to have because they are too lazy or don't realize they should have it, or are not confident, or, they're just doing it to get the PM, or, whatever. Right. I think in the worst case scenario, or, the one end of the spectrum, maybe not worst case, Grand Lodge is there the same reason parents are involved in Boy Scouting, or I guess Scouts BSA. They're there to make sure nothing gets burned down through negligence, and to make sure that the menus that are planned for the events are reasonable, and kind of there as auditors and as controls. But there's enormous influence, right? And I guess mentorship is the word, as Grand Lodge should be providing mentorship, right? Maybe not regimented hard goals and guidelines, but less ambitious goals as the minimum bar, and then goalposts and encouragement of what's possible.
The education committee in Ohio has one person from each of the 25 districts. And the reason why they did that was so that, every district is different. And what we got a lot out of education committees in the past were things that kind of reflected one viewpoint or one area. You and I have joked that Wisconsin is the Grand Lodge of Milwaukee and everybody else. Or, Illinois, they'll say it's the Grand Lodge of Chicago and everybody else. In Ohio, we had a great thing called Replace Yourself. And I remember them saying to us, well, yeah, just show the DVDs. And I'm in the 17th district. I got 21 lodges. There's a DVD player in 4 of them. There are 2 guys in Ohio that I love. Well, I love. The one is Steve Wallace out of the 13th and 12th, 13th, and one is Brad. They aren't educators. They aren't, they both are college educated. They both are hardworking, smart individuals, but they're not the guys in the ivory towers. They're the guys, Brad's a handyman and property manager and farmer and removes snow. That perspective has to be on the education committee. Somebody's got to be thinking about, somebody's got to have a viewpoint that's different, who's able to articulate that. The most dangerous place in Masonic education is the one where everybody thinks that everybody else is brilliant. You need somebody to be there and say, have you thought about this? Do you realize this? Do you know this? That different viewpoint, different experience, different just conception has to be there. It has to be listened to, because I know the most dangerous thing in Masonry is that homogeneousness, I think.
We put this group together specifically because of the 3 different jurisdictions that are represented. And I'm paraphrasing here, but almost every answer has come back down to either what the individual can do or what the lodge can do.
There are these educational entities across the country and within each state that for some reason are siloed and don't talk to each other. And those opportunities we have to recognize, like, oh, we need to get out of our little bubble and go see what they're doing. It takes a person with vision and drive to be able to recognize that and to make that happen, especially when a Grand Lodge isn't necessarily supporting that. Wisconsin is not a member of the Midwest Conference, not anymore. But getting to know Jason, Jason drove himself and Adam across this, whatever, to come to Ohio, to come to that, because he saw the benefit and he brought that back. And when I was Wisconsin, they at least know who we are. James, Indiana walked in that day. They were a member of the conference. And, you, besides being my major domo and making sure that I ate and didn't fall down the stairs, and bringing us Heather Calloway from, and kind of managing her, you managed that relationship all day. And by lunch, they'd allocated the money and they had put in their application to return to the conference. David, you and I have been friends for a while, but OLR had never historically had any kind of truck with the conference. But whether, I bullied you and Taylor or just asked you nicely, you guys came. And it was, not that Indiana was antagonistic towards the conference, but, they were leery. Wisconsin has been a little leery. OLR has sort of in the past kind of done their own thing, but it takes those personalities to come together and say, yep, we need to go there and talk to those people. So
again, part of the purpose here was to bring some different Grand Lodge jurisdictions together. As a member of the Grand Lodge Education Committee in your jurisdiction, is there something you would like to steal, which is, of course, the greatest form of flattery, that you would like to steal as far as education goes from another jurisdiction? And it does not have to be any of the 3 jurisdictions that are currently in the room.
I'm going
Go,
first.
Jason. Go, Jason.
I have this little book here. The reason I am a member of East Palestine 417 is so that I can be part of the Royal Schofield Society. I would love to talk to our Deputy Grand Master about something like that. It's a great program. I've got one part left for the what's it, Pillars of the Craft, the second one. So my program to steal would be the Royal Schofield Society, which fits because our Grand Master's middle name is Royal, David Royal Ritchie. So maybe we could do something with that. I'll talk to him soon.
I want to steal from everybody. Part of something we did for Midwest Conference is we did standardize those jurisdictional reports, which meant talking to people from the jurisdictions just to kind of see what they're up to. And it is amazing what I learned in those conversations. And I know that James did that as well, because, yeah, I mean, you find out you have a lot of assumptions, and you find out that there's a lot of different ideas out there. I do love the eludation program out of Indiana. I love what they're doing with their drip program. I love what a lot of different jurisdictions are doing in terms of training and supporting the lodges. There's just different programs that are out there, or different vehicles. Some are using Grandview, some are using a different system. That you find that there's similar problems, but you find people are trying different tactics. And so there's always something there that I can kind of borrow. I love what Michigan is doing. I really do, but it's so radical that I'd love to see how it all works out. It's kind of what James is talking about. They disbanded their education committee, and they've essentially created kind of like a band of fraternal consultants that go to different lodges and talk to them and identify them and evaluate them, and then develop a personalized plan to help that lodge become the best version of themselves. But that's systemic. That requires an investment. That requires an entire restructuring and redefinition of what that portion of Masonic education is. But I would love to see how that all plays out.
I'm already in the midst of stealing the Royal Schofield Society and the Thomas Five Ash Riddick Society of Missouri, which was begat by RSS, which was begat by the Maryland Masonic Academy.
Ours was different.
Yeah, they're all, yeah. And mine's going to be quite a bit different too, and kind of have an educational platform to not just be the low volume, high effort, program that RSS is, right? I will have a program like that. We'll also have supplementary stuff for the new guys, right? The hey, is your lodge not mentoring your EAs and you'd like to farm that out to this Grand Lodge portal? We've got something that can help, right? So since I've already stolen that, I'll say North Carolina, Ben Williams has created the Middle Chamber program. He wasn't alone, but he was one of the two pillars of that, as far as I understand. Yeah, I'd say I'd probably want to steal some portion of that at some point. I don't know that I'll ever be able to. And I know that they're working to kind of train people in other states. I think Missouri, Texas has some form of it that is being worked at some level, or planned to be worked at some level. But I'd love to get to the point where it would be feasible and reasonable to do something like that, because like I said, with efficiency, maybe that's not the number one thing we need to focus on, but I think it's to create a culture where Masons are invested in and more subject matter experts on Masonry than just members with a lowercase m. I think I'd be very pleased if we were in that situation.